Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey there, listeners. Well, welcome to 2025. I want to say thank you for tuning in to the Leadership is Changing podcast. But as we step into a brand new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the incredible journey we've had in 2024. Over the past year, I've been privileged to feature some amazing guests on this podcast, leaders, change makers, and innovators who shared their wisdom, experiences, and insights. And together we've explored what it means to lead in today's ever-changing world. Over the next month, we're going to bring you some of these highlights. And in the Highlights 2024 episodes, we're bringing you some of the most impactful moments and key takeaways from 2024. Now, these highlights capture the essence of what this podcast is all about, helping leaders like you thrive in times of change and complexity. Now, whether it's tips on being courageous, thinking outside the box, adapting, or navigating transitions to higher levels of leadership, these snippets are sure to inspire and energize you for the year ahead. And of course, these highlights are just the tip of the iceberg. If something resonates with you, I encourage you to go and check out the full interviews from 2024 to dive deeper into the incredible conversations we've had. So let's get into it. Here are the highlights from 2024 on the Leadership is Changing podcast.
I'm in the United States, in the state of Utah.
Excellent. Have you always been in the US?
Well, no, actually, I did spend 2 years overseas. I lived in Japan for a couple of years when I was about 20 years old. And in fact, if you remember the earthquake that happened recently, that was actually the very first place, the location I lived in when I was over there.
Wow. And so in Japan, what were you doing there? What were you 20 years of age, were you sort of just touring or what were you doing?
I was actually a volunteer missionary for my church. So I was actually over there just talking about Jesus, which, of course, Japanese people love to talk about, which I'm being sarcastic when I say it that way.
I'm sure. Yeah, cool. And of course, they would understand your English very well.
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, I definitely had to speak Japanese fluently to be over there.
Yeah. Amazing. And so you have an organization or a business called Money Ripples, and you also understand you've got a podcast as well called Money Ripples. Tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us more about your background.
Yeah. So, my journey was interesting. I mean, I was raised by great parents that taught me, your word is your bond. You live a life of integrity. You work hard. You follow your dreams and your passions. But when it came to money was kind of a thing that was a little bit more rare, right? It was more of a scarcity conversation. It was not a positive thing. It was always about how we don't have enough money. We can't afford this. What do you think I am, made of money? Money doesn't grow on trees. Those kind of phrases I would hear growing up, and maybe you did too. And so, as a result, I didn't want to live that kind of life. I wanted something different. And so as a result, when I went to college, I was going to become a business consultant, but I figured I should have real life business experience that I could call from. And so I dropped out of college and I said, let's find some business to do. And the first one was to become a financial advisor, not realizing that it was very easy to become a financial advisor. You didn't have to be a financial genius to do it. You just had to be able to pass a test and not be a criminal, and you can become a financial advisor too. So that's what I did. And after several years, I sat down with my dad because he finally said, well, Chris, are you going to become my financial advisor at some point? So I sat down with him and understand, again, my dad was a tightwad. The guy was very cheap. He would say frugal, but we all said he was cheap. He was the kind of guy that saved every penny he could. He paid off all his debt. He was very proud of it. He was debt free, packing money into his retirement plans. And then lo and behold, I sit down with him. I said, Dad, you're 61 years old, but if you want to retire today, you better hope you die in 5 years because that's when you're going to run out of money. Okay, Chris, I didn't want to hear that. So what do I do? And I said, I don't know. You did everything right. from what I've been taught as a financial advisor. And that kind of got me on a mission. It's almost like Matrix, right? The movie The Matrix, when you take the red pill. I eventually started taking the red pill, going away from financial advising, started looking at people that actually were financially free, which were people investing in real estate and whatnot. And so eventually got to the point where I realized if none of my clients were really financially free, including my dad, if none of the financial advisors were financially free from these investments, why should I keep doing it? And so I left, I quit, vowed never to teach about money again. Of course, later on that next year, I had enough money coming in, passive income coming in from my investments that I was able to retire when I was 28 years old. And naturally, when you're 28 years old and you don't have a job, either they think you're lazy or they want to know how the heck you did it. And most people want to know how I did what I did. And so 2007 came out of retirement to teach what I'm teaching today, which is teach people how to become work optional, right? You work because you want to, not because you have to. And you create enough income that you can actually do that. You can choose to leave work or you can keep doing what you love.
Very cool. It's funny how people look at people sort of like in their 20s, whatever, and they're wealthy and they've done well and they're retired. What do they do all day? Maybe they're a drug dealer. I don't know. And just people just start gossiping, and it's just amazing how it all works. Now, I noticed that in your bio, as I was reading it, that you're the cash flow expert and anti-financial advisor. What do you mean by anti-financial advisor?
Yeah, basically, I think financial advisors suck. That's pretty much what I mean. I mean, and granted, I know they have good hearts. I know they mean well because I was one of those people too. But what I've found is that when it has less than a 1% success rate for getting people financially free themselves, there's got to be a problem, right? It'd be like going on Google reviews and seeing that restaurant and there's 99 one-star reviews, but there's only one 5-star review and saying, yeah, I think I want to go there. I want to try that food out. I'm sure I'll get poisoned, but why not, right? That's kind of like what it is with financial advising. And so I'm telling people to, instead of taking the traditional path of spend nothing, save everything, save it forever, hopefully that someday you might have something by blowing your money and gambling it into the stock market, instead getting them to do something that actually has been proven to work, something that buy real assets to pay you real income. And so I'm really preaching people to go against the norm, go against the grain in that sense of doing what actually has worked versus what's not worked for the masses.
Very good. And, I think it's in leadership and in life, I think we should think about possibly going against the grain, not to be that person who's skeptic or, conspiracy and all that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, mentors have always said to me, if there's 100 people and 99 of them are going that way, go the opposite. And I think that's what you're saying, right? Just go the opposite way and see where it goes and where it takes you, because it's actually a good thing. And I think in leadership, the same thing too, is we think we have to do something because we've seen it done that way before and we think that's the right way, and it's not. And so then we start getting the same results that we've always got, or we get the same results that our leaders have always got. And so performance reviews are a great example. Most leaders think they're doing a performance review is correct because that's the way it was done to them, and it's not always the right way, right? So yeah, good points. Thank you. So if you're a financial advisor listening, that's okay. Talk to Chris. He'll help you out. He'll show you the right way to do things and move things forward. So, which is all good. Yeah, very good. Hey, Chris, question for you here. We're going to be talking a little bit more about leadership and so forth, but also want to know it from your lens in the sense of your experiences from, things right from when you're in Tokyo, right through to now and in your field and industry, but also you talking to people. But the first question I got to you to ask you is, well, how did you get into leadership?
It's an interesting question because it was almost like it's thrust upon you, right? Sometimes it's not like something you go seeking after. I definitely was seeking after leadership positions. I mean, if you saw me in my childhood, I was definitely a very shy, reserved kid. I was not trying to be a leader in any way, shape, or form. But I'll tell you, the first time I realized I liked not necessarily being a leader, but being a guide, right? Which is a form of leadership, was actually in my 4th grade class. There was talking about the history class of the pioneers going across, from the east to the west, the United States. And I remember there were some actual natives that were students of my mom. My mom's a professional oil painter. She was teaching these students, and they were natives that were ancestors. Their ancestors were the ones actually along that trail that these pioneers took. And so as we're going along, they said, hey, when you go on this trail, don't take that way. Take this way instead. And don't take that one, take this one. And even though it was counterintuitive sometimes, And so I would go back to my classmates. Again, I'm only 9 years old, but I'd go back to my classmates and say, guys, this is what we do. We take this trail instead, but it's longer. Yeah, but you'll get killed on this part of the trail.
Mm.
And so we started to do that. And the next thing you know, we actually won the game. It was over the course of like, a couple weeks that we did this, but we actually came in first place. And it wasn't that I thought I was much of a leader, but I know that when I learn something and I find something that I feel is useful, I want to teach it. So I feel like I'm a natural teacher, but also a leader becomes part of it too. So even though I was a very shy kid, I would sweat talking to more than two people at once. My palms get all sweaty trying to talk to a girl. That was horrible in high school, right? Most awkward kid ever. But I remember reading books by like, certain American leaders like Malcolm X, who's big on the civil rights leadership, much like Martin Luther King Jr. was. I read his autobiography and how he was so outspoken and he would speak his mind and from his heart. And I thought, man, I would like to be like that too. If only I could do that. And so that inspiration from, going from grade school, moving into college eventually kind of got me to break out of my shell when I got into college and really started to step more into leadership type of positions.
I'm based in San Diego, North County, San Diego, sunny San Diego.
Okay, so that's your accent is definitely a San Diego one or not?
Yeah. No, I'm native, born, bred, and buttered in Ireland, south side of Dublin. I've been here in the States for 27 years now.
Wow, 27 years. I've got to say that I was in Dublin just a few years ago, and being in Dublin, when I came home, I said to my wife that Dublin has got to be one of the most happiest people I've ever met on the earth. They really are really, really happy people, except for a few people I asked about because the Pope was arriving that week, the same week that I was there. And there was different kind of comments because the Pope hadn't been to the island for many, many years. It was good. But I had to leave the town because it wasn't big enough for the both of us. So we both were at the airport at the same
Yeah,
time.
no, there wouldn't have been enough security for both of you. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all good. Hey, John, I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. I know you've got a podcast called Sales Pop. You're also an organization you work at, Pipeliner CRM, but also you've got an Amazon best-selling book as well. You're the author of the book called Winning the Battle for Sales and Social Evil. So that's all good. So what I'd like to do is, and I understand you're also into martial
I
arts
am.
as well, right? So tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, my background. So as you mentioned, I'm originally from Ireland, and I came to the US. I was fortunate to get an opportunity to come to the US during the dot-com era. And so I moved from a startup in Dublin to they'd opened sales and marketing and office in Silicon Valley. So I moved there during the dot-com era in the mid to late 90s. And which is an amazing time to come, to be honest. And it was amazing. And it wasn't really like moving to America because Silicon Valley is this bubble to itself. And the dot-com, it was completely insane time. And that was my introduction. And then I decided I'd come for 2 years. So that's how good my planning is. 27 years later, I'm still here. But I was fortunate enough to meet a California girl and got married, and I have a son now. And to be honest, America just gave me this wealth of opportunities that I would never have had in Ireland, to be frank. And the opportunity to be able to, I've had the opportunity to be able to work with multiple organizations. I was in Silicon Valley. I was then at New Horizons Computer Learning Centers, which is a franchisor. I was part of the franchisor executive team. I was part of an education startup, K-12 education startup in Pennsylvania. Then I was at the Mortgage Bankers Association. I ran their kind of for-profit education side, training and certification side. I was there when I knew about the housing bust about a year before most people did. And so that's why I was warned. I was saying, if you're looking for a common denominator between the dot-com and the housing crash, it's probably me, because I was in both industries when those happened. And then I got the fantastic opportunity to take over as CEO of Huthwaite, which was a sales consultancy based on the book Spin Selling, the IP of Neil Rackham, who had done the most comprehensive research ever into sales and a best-selling sales book of all time. And I was given the opportunity to run that business by the parent company Informa, who owned lots of businesses. English company, but they allowed us to run our businesses as our own businesses. We just had to deliver results for them, which was a great introduction to results-based performance. And then they gave me another business to run simultaneously, Omega Performance, which was credit training for banks. And so I did that for a number of years, I think about 6, 7 years. And then those businesses, we helped the parent company sell them to a private equity group. And then I went to move out on my own and do management consulting. So I set up my own business, started gathering some clients. And one of my early clients was Nicholas Kimla, the founder of Pipeliner CRM. He had just moved from Vienna, Austria to the US. And so we did a few projects. And then one day he came back from Austria. He'd been a trip to Austria. And he said, I was sitting by the lake and I just said, John, you need to join me and you need to come on this journey. And so I said, I don't know. And then eventually I said, okay, it sounds interesting. Let's give it a go. And so we've been working hand in glove for 10 years now with Pipeliner, and we're very aligned on how we see sales and the important role of salespeople and education of salespeople and providing the best tool possible to help salespeople. So that's my background in a nutshell.
Excellent. And so at Pipeliner, you're the Chief Strategy and Marketing
correct.
Officer? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Now, you talked about you being the common denominator from the .com and then the mortgage side of things and all that. What's coming up next?
I guess I'm in the SaaS technology business, right? So you want to get out of that quite fast. No, I've left it behind. I've been in it so long now that if I was going to implode it, it would have been happened by now.
Yeah, that's good. And so the other thing I was going to ask you was the book itself, The Winning the Battle for Sales and Social Upheaval. Tell us more about the book.
So the first book, Winning the Battle for Sales, it was interesting. I wrote this blog post about when salespeople are in a slump, right? When you're in a slump, I likened it to sometimes you just need a result. And it doesn't matter how big or significant, it's just a result. And I based it on George Washington and the Continental Army during the American Rebellion, when they were kind of at the end. They had disease. A lot of the soldiers were on contracts. The contracts were up. They were all ready to go home. They were demoralized. And basically, they were at the point of, it would have been the collapse of the American Revolution. And then Washington, in the dead of winter, said, let's jump in these boats. Let's cross the Delaware River. And they attacked these Hessians, mercenaries who were fighting for the British, who were encamped over there, completely unexpected, had this victory. And that really was what turned the whole war, was just that audacious kind of crazy endeavor that they took there. But it changed the whole world. And we submitted that to McGraw-Hill, and McGraw-Hill said, yeah, this sounds interesting. Let's build a book out of it. So we wrote this book. I had a guy doing illustrations for me, a guy doing research for me, and we decided to take battles, even obscure battles, and connect them to sales lessons. The point being, or the idea being, that ultimately you would be able to recall a sales lesson because it was associated with an incident. And that's where the book came from.
That's actually a fascinating way of looking at it as well. But I think you're right. Those stories, those war stories or experiences, as we call it, fantastic. And then being able to relate it to people as well. Really cool. That's a great way of doing it. Martial arts? Which martial arts are you into?
Taekwondo. I've been doing, I did Taekwondo in Ireland in my late teens and early 20s. And then here, when my son was born, he's an only child, and at 3.5, I thought I need him to, I want him to be able to defend himself. So I took him down. There happened to be a great Taekwondo place in Virginia, Grandmaster Mountain Kim's place. And I started him off. And after a couple of weeks, they said to me, why is your son doing this and not you? And so they shamed me into going back to it. And the best decision I ever made, because 17 years later, both my son and I are 4th degree masters. He's continued to do with me. We're now with Master On, a fantastic master up here in Vista. So we do Taekwondo, Hapkido, we do some Judo, we do lots of, but it's great because for me, it's a form of escape and meditation, because I can't think about work or anything else when I'm at class or at session, because let's face it, if your mind starts to wander, you might get a smack in the head. So it's always good to be focused. But for me, it's a fantastic meditation and just a way of like clearing my mind and just being with myself.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.